Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Claire Kilner, Head of Alumni at the University of Manchester. It's wonderful to see so many Mancunian alumni in the room tonight. I hope to meet with and chat with as many of you as possible after the event, during the networking session. My job tonight is just to introduce our speakers. Feedback. Welcome to Sir Andre Geim, our Nobel laureate, Professor Dame Nancy Rothwell, our President and Vice-Chancellor, and Hian-Seng Tang, the President of our Singaporean Alumni Association. All that's left for me to do is to hand over to Nancy to say a few words. Thank you.
So thank you very much indeed, Claire. It's a great pleasure to be here, back in Singapore again, and seeing so many alumni. This has been rather a short trip for me. I arrived yesterday morning and I'm leaving on the late flight tonight, but I have managed to pack in quite a lot. It's fantastic to be able to meet so many of you. Some of you I've met before, some of you are meeting for the first time. Andre, by contrast, is here as part of his sabbatical because he has appointment in Singapore. He said today that he's 5% Singaporean. So he's been coming to Singapore for 7 years, so we were fortunate that he could join us for this evening. So I'm going to hand back over to Hian-Seng, who's going to go ahead with some questions.
Testing. Can you hear me? Well, University President and Vice-Chancellor, Professor Dame Nancy Rothwell, 2010 Nobel Prize laureate, Professor Sir Andre Geim, Ms. Claire Kilner, Deputy Director, Head of Alumni and Donor Communications and Engagement, fellow alumni and invited guests. Good evening. Welcome to our alumni event of the year. And it's great to see so many of you attending tonight's event for the networking and the most important, joining our in conversation with our university president and our 2010 Nobel Prize laureate for physics. So I'll just start with the session. Let me pose the first question to Sir Andre. You have received numerous international awards and distinctions. Besides the 2010 Nobel Prize award, you are also the winner of the IG Nobel Prize in 2000, which made you the only person to receive both. And in the September-October 2004 edition of the Economist magazine cover story, Jules Whittle, who did an interview with you then, if you remember, refer you as the godfather of graphene.
Godfather. Yeah. Godfather of graphene.
Okay. So, together with Professor Costa Novoselov, you are most famous for isolating and demonstrating the remarkable properties of graphene. But I understand you have made many more scientific breakthroughs since winning the Nobel Prize in 2010. Which discovery are you most proud of? Please.
It's so difficult question to answer. I'm trying to find a smart answer to this one and can't find graphene was a good luck. Nobel Prizes usually associated with very smart people and so on. I'm not going to say that I'm dumb, that's for sure, but basically I always tell people that what is important is to be a little, there are 6-7 million people around the world who are doing research professionally. So it's the country of researchers of the size of Singapore, and even a little bit bigger. So you can imagine how many dumb and how many smart people around those. So you have to compete with so many people. So it has to be luck. You have to be a little bit smarter, a little bit quicker, a little bit more fortunate to this. If I wouldn't be the discoverer of graphene, I don't know, maybe 6 months later, well, don't think so, but certainly within the next 3-5 years, someone else would bring graphene out. So we are just bearers of the Nobel Prizes. Okay, Nobel Prize, in my opinion, I said many times to people, and only people who didn't want to accept it are Nobel Prize winners. I told to everyone we are just bearers of awards which the humanity gives to themselves. So I have to accept that probably graphene is most important, but I also like this Ig Nobel Prize not because it's an important award, it's an award because it kind of tells that I'm not as self-important as many of my colleagues, because I know many colleagues with a great sense of humor can laugh at everything and make brilliant jokes, as long as those jokes about not themselves. So I'm a little bit, in this respect, accepting the Nobel Prize, I have a little bit self-deprecation. So yeah, both of those prizes are, to me, on the same level. I'm valuing them on the same level. Public, maybe not. Oh, sorry, you didn't hear me. I'm not going to repeat it again. Yeah, okay, thank you.
So I did some readings about yourself and some of your past interviews and articles from the net. And it seems to me that you sound pretty cool and relaxed when hearing that you were awarded the Nobel Prize. Can you please share with the audience, how was it like winning the Nobel Prize, especially when you are the winner of the Physics Prize at a relatively young age of 52 at that time? Okay. And so what happened on the day it was announced?
Well, I still consider myself relatively young. But actually, as a Nobel Prize winning ceremony, I invited Nancy there. She loved it, but being the Nobel Prize winner is really something special, which the whole Sweden makes such a show. You won't believe this. People dress up in their best costumes, sit around their dinner table at their homes, switch on TV to watch the ceremony, and like you mentioned, they go into the same palace as Nobel Prize winners. So I strongly recommend everyone of you who is present there win the Nobel Prize. It's really worth the occasion. It's an incredible experience to be in Sweden during this ceremony.
Well, now the question to our president. Could you share what happened on the day in your office when the announcement was made, and what's your reaction? And also from the university perspective, that two of the professors are actually the Nobel Prize winners.
Well, first of all, it was a surprise, almost thinking about not really going to accept it, because by then, graphene was very famous. People started to say it was going to win a Nobel Prize. But I saw it, I didn't even know that was the day of the prize announcement. That was a meeting called out. You were quite good about it, actually. The costume was quite flustered, and when we brought champagne, he sort of couldn't believe what was going on. But there's a famous picture of Andre in the quadrangle of the university, and I went over to hug him, and the caption was, "A well-wisher, congratulations, Professor Geim." But just to come out of the ceremony, I mean, it is a fantastic event, and particularly good for me because we have house of sleep, so I know sleep very well. It's very useful because it's snow and so on. But it's also quite a difficult occasion for me because I know this story very well. I write every week a little update for the One was black and white, and one was black. They were different heights, but they were both left feet. So I went through the whole ceremony, and the way for it, with Nancy, with 2 left shoes. I think they'll be noticed.
So my question, was Sir Andre being informed first or the university?
No, you're told first. You're told before the university starts about the prize. It's called, isn't it?
Yes, they called me up at home, and actually I also missed that. I expected the Nobel Prize because one for 2 years everyone is talking to you and everyone wants to lure you to work for another university because of expectations, etc., etc. Including the US, actually, probably speaking with respect to my younger colleague. But I have confused the dates, so I didn't expect at a particular date. So I was at home, and there was a telephone call, and a lady said, "It's a very important call. Please don't hang up." And I said, "Are you going to tell me that I won the Nobel Prize?" Because accent was Swedish and so on. And in her last minute she said, "Wait a minute, you'll speak with someone whom you know." Because she saw that I'm taking it as coax and etc. A person from the Nobel Committee whom I didn't know, okay, came around, but SECA was quite relaxed about this.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sure as alumni, we're all very proud that professors from our uni won the Nobel Prize. So for the president, how proud were you as the university president at that particular moment?
It's much nicer story about the Nobel Prize actually than about Nobel Prize because, everyone is ready to accept Nobel Prize. When someone gives you, as you politely say, IG Nobel Prize, which is also known as Ig Nobel Prize, you think very hard and whether you would like to be a bearer of Ig Nobel Prize. It was for good experiment, actually educational experiment, meditated the frog and the sumo wrestler. I didn't meditate the sumo wrestler. They confused me with someone else, but the frog was my personal achievement at that time. So someone asked you whether you would like to accept the Ig Nobel Prize. You have a week to think, and it was one of the hardest decisions in my life whether I wanted them. And I was not a full professor at that time, I was associate professor. It was a hard decision. I was not that adventurous, so I found someone, a friend of mine who was famous at that time, named Sir Michael Berry from the Berry case, a very famous mathematical physicist, and we wrote a paper which was called Off Flying Frogs. And I said to the committee, okay, I need someone to cover me as a leaf, or what's the expression? Cover as a fig leaf, yeah. So, Sir Michael, can you serve us a fig leaf, please? And he also saw the hard at the moment, and we say, okay, we accept it because the questioning this, no harm to be done to anyone's reputation. If you say no, no one will know. But with benefit of hindsight, I think I'm proud of accepting it. Okay, sorry.
That's fine. So I became President Vice-Chancellor in July 2010, and the prize was in October, just a few months later. And so we're lucky as Vice-Chancellor. Yours.
It was your
Well, to be honest, first of all, it was just a bit stunning because
those of you who know the old Quality University on Oxford Road, it was just full of TV cameras and press all day, and just calls coming in all the time. And it probably wasn't until a few days later that we think about the importance. It certainly wasn't until a few months later that I realised the impact of it. And probably even now you still start to see that impact. I mean, a very interesting thing is that if any of you have children who want to come and study in Manchester, please encourage them to do so. But I have to tell you, they'll have to be incredibly good if they want to study physics, because the grades to get into physics are higher than Oxford, Cambridge, or anywhere else. Maybe slightly Brown Cox, but in large part a Nobel Prize. So the implications are very, very large, and the global implications are very large. And people know.
What is, in your opinion, how much is of Nobel Prize and how much is of graphene?
I think it depends where you are and who you are. I think if you understand physics, it's graphene. And possibly in certain countries it's graphene. I think for many people, they know a Nobel Prize, but they don't know what graphene is.
I'll probably concur with what the President says. I guess to a lot of those non-engineering or non-physical science type, Nobel Prize is wow. But I guess for those into the technical research, probably graphene, it's something that, wow, that's amazing, that's a new material.
Yeah, can I just add, I mean, one of the neat things about it is that very often when somebody wins the Nobel Prize, it takes more than 3 sentences to explain what they've discovered and why it's important. Sometimes 10 sentences, and then you still don't understand. With graphene, it's so simple. So anybody can... Sorry. I'll stop.
Scotch tape, yeah.
I'll stop there. But it's so neat, and kids come in and make graphene in the university with Scotch tape. You can respond if you want.
Well, for me, it probably will take 10 sentences to explain what graphene is, okay, because, it's probably worth explaining, because this perspective is known quite well for people in material science, but for outsiders, it's, Scotch tape, very thin material, 200 times stronger than steel.
Explain the Scotch tape. Some people, does everybody know what the Scotch tape is?
Yeah, it's your turn.
Okay, so you take a little bit of graphite, which comes from like pencil, and then you gradually peel layers off with Scotch tape until you get down to graphene, which pure graphene is 1 atom thick. Did I pass?
No.
Oh.
No.
I'm a biologist.
Well, I'm so sorry.
Okay, well...
I was going to ask another question.
The incentives for graphene commercialization are supposedly limitless, and we're seeing millions of dollars being poured into Manchester and our university's 61 million National Graphene Institute. So my question for Sir Andre, we all know that universities, research institutes, corporate businesses worldwide are all putting all these big dollars into graphene application, R&D. What do you think will be, not the first, but the most important commercial application of graphene, in your opinion?
It's this question asks for so many answers. Okay, let me explain what graphene is.
He's going to tell you anyway.
Yeah. If you look around yourself, even if you're a material science or whatever, you're looking around, every material, every object you see around has 3 dimensions, which is width, length, and height. 3 of those, okay? And until recently, we believed that all materials have to be like that. There were even very strong rules of physics which forbid materials which are extremely thin. So then, one of a sudden, we learn about 10 years ago, a little bit more than that there are materials which essentially have no thickness at all, no height at all. So graphene is the very first of those materials, probably still most remarkable of those materials, but we know now a couple of hundred materials similar to graphene. Graphene's sisters and brothers and so on. So what you have on your plate is essentially a new world of materials which the humanity have no idea before, and we know whenever something lands up on human beings' laps, whether it's iron, bronze or silicon, whether we would like it or not, we start investigating what you can do with those materials. So it's not one material at all. It's not even a very remarkable material, one of most remarkable materials we ever learn. It's just a reference to this class of new materials. So whether we want it or not, we will investigate what's possible to do with those materials. And when you hear so many superlatives about this material and others, the thinnest, the strongest, the most electrically conductive, the most heat conductive, blah, 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 10 other superlative, you really think that something really big has come into place. So this is why I asked the question whether it's Nobel Prize or material. I personally think that there are many Nobel Prizes given for great discoveries, but this one signifies something in terms of material science which can really change a lot. So in terms of commercialization, well, it takes years. How many years it took for silicon, for example, to establish itself? It was discovered in 20s, 30s, studies in 40s, 50s, and the silicon revolution happened 50 years later. So essentially essentially graphene has started to be exploited only 5-6 years ago when mass production of this material has been developed. So we are at very early stages, and usually it takes 2-3 decades. We are currently half a decade since the discovery, and there are hundreds of companies around the world. There are many graphene centers around the world, including one in Manchester, one in Singapore, and so on. So it's a very rapid development by any standard, thanks to this class of new materials, which are now called graphene as a nickname.
Well, I hope the next time we hear the good news from you, we'll hear that we have moved on to the applications of graphene commercializing.
Oh, there are already applications. There are many applications now. There are commercial products, despite 5-6 years from now. It's most of those applications, which probably around, 30-50 companies around the world are using. They use a little bit powder, graphene powder or graphene paste to improve thermal conductivity. If you open, or ever your son or daughter open your computer and you see inside this central processor, around this central processor there is something which reminds you of plumbing. How many people have seen what is inside their laptops? It's really worth looking how ugly the system works, because there is a pipe which is a plumber can make probably with all those tools, some circulating liquid. It's for cooling this chip. And cooling of your circuits is a very important problem. And this is one of the first. Your mobile phones, sometimes get hot as well if you have too much GPS. This is one of the most important applications which is already on the market. The next one, I know people put graphene into tires, which make them more durable and better, whatever adhesion. People claim different things, but they did put it into tires. The claim I heard, I have not seen the data, if you put graphene in tires in sort of 2-3% of it, the tires can last 2-3 times longer. And mountains of one-off tires. You can think about just environmental, not monetary impact of this development. So it looks very good despite its very early stage.
Right. So for President Nancy, the reality is that any new discovery is only worthy and valuable per se if we can go beyond the academic research and progress into actual business commercialization. So what role should the university play in commercializing these new discoveries, and how should they go about doing this? And what do you think the challenges they face?
Gosh, how long have you got?
Nancy prepares for a question which she is going to be asked at the parliamentary hearing. We have in the UK parliamentary hearing.
I'm not going, you're going. You listen to that. So the question is, what role should universities play? And Andre has an opinion on this as well, I can tell you. I think universities do have an important role, but it's not normally in the commercialization per se. Because universities, their mission, their gearing, their activities, their expectations are around discovery. And discovery often is not the same as commercialization. Now, that's not to say that some things that universities discover they can't commercialize, but often universities are not the best organizations, and the academics who make the discovery are very often not the best people to do the commercialization. So my feeling is that universities should look towards applications, should wherever possible develop or test prototypes, should work with companies that can commercialize, should support their own staff or students or whoever else to commercialize if they wish to, normally in a startup, not necessarily within the university. So, I mean, the National Graphene Institute was built in part to develop partnerships with industry, and there are several companies with labs within it, so actually working side by side. But the thing that worries me is the suggestion from some that universities should entirely take over that commercialization. And I think that means they'll fail at commercialization and they'll fail at discovery as well, because I don't think the two are always compatible. I'm sure you'll want to answer, Andre.
Sir Andre, got any comments to add on?
It's such a complicated subject. So, you see, there was the Cold War, and everyone was scared. And then, because of the Cold War, every government put money into the defense, and defense supported fundamental research. The moon program was not because of the interest of human beings, what is over there. It was, as you know, the demonstration of the power of the America over the power of the Soviet Union. Then we are now living in a very relaxed state when, people say, why do we need to invest any money into the fundamental research? It's much better to invest them into housing benefits or whatever. So there are pressures on the government, so gradually fundamental science and universities get less and less money. And the big industry, without being supported by the military complex, they started more responding to the pressure of shareholders. And shareholders want to have dividends not 10 years from now. We're all shareholders. Our pension funds are in this shareholding as well. So always there is a pressure to generate profit. So gradually more and more CEOs came in power who said, okay, let's increase our dividends and cut out this and that. Nancy was in AstraZeneca board of directors, and they despite everyone loved research in medical research, they still killed their research division quite easily when it came to dividends. So this is why we have this huge gap between academia and industry these days. Okay, industry has no ability even to understand what kind of science university are doing, and university have these remit, which Nancy mentioned, of education and creating fundamental knowledge. Okay, we can produce very tiny pieces of materials. We are not good in commercializing. So there is a gap. The nation which will find the solution for this gap will be the world leader in the next 20 years. So far, no one has found the solution. There are efforts by different governments to create something like A-Star in Singapore. In different countries they are called different names, but it's trying to bridge this gap. But this is the reality of our short-sightedness about science, and especially industry withdrawal from commercialization. And what do you expect from governments? Governments can do nothing to press industries to put money into long-term research. So what they do, they put pressure on the universities. So now it seems to be a new times are coming when the universities have to be commercialization, which is probably okay, but we don't know the rules of the game yet.
So can I just briefly add, Singapore is, in many scientists' view, way ahead of many European countries. There's a lot of evidence showing a strong relationship between investment in R&D and economic growth and prosperity. Now, to say it's absolutely causal is very, very difficult, but nevertheless there are enough countries. And Singapore has maintained that and invested, while countries like the UK invest very much less. And so Singapore and South Korea were visited by the Chancellor before the one we've got now, several Chancellors ago, and it was as a result of that the UK at least maintained and slightly increased the science budget, because they saw in Singapore and South Korea how that investment was paying off. So I think we have a lot to learn from Singapore about investment in R&D.
Well, I guess that's true. I think recently the Singapore government has put on for the next 5 years or 2020 plan on the RIE Plan 2020, they are committing $90 billion of investment into all this, onto the sciences. So I guess from the university perspective, you can facilitate to play the role between the university and the commercial business community in terms of commercialization. So, but the next question, which is more interesting for Sir Andre, given that President Nancy is here, it's given that your scientific reputation that you could work anywhere in the world, and many top universities will probably be courting you to work with them, why have you chosen to be in Manchester?
It's a good question, Nancy.
Sir Andre?
You're much better in telling this story.
No, go on.
No, I'm going to pose the same question to President Nancy later, so we want to hear from yourself.
You gave a really good answer the last time we did an in-conversation.
Yes, I did, but I'm embarrassed to repeat it.
Don't worry, I don't mind. I'm the only person who's heard it before. You can repeat it.
No.
Come on.
I had more dreams that time than now. So essentially, I was invited to join different universities around the world and so on, but England was all the time very helpful on a local and not only within the university, within the science community. It was very helpful. I came in 2000 with actually nothing. Okay, it was 2001. I get a startup fund, which it was 100,000 pounds. Which people were surprised why it was so low by American standards. I have to say that I still have this startup funds. I didn't use it, and I increase it by many times. So it's called slush funds, as mafia usually calls it. But then I got my first grant, and then I went to the Fellow of the Royal Society 2007 and so on, well before the Nobel Prize, actually based on my previous achievement rather than graphene business. The citation, I believe it's about previous achievement. So, and then, okay, the story which I told usually about Manchester is an old guy in the United States came to me and say, wow, you gave such a nice presentation, it was about graphene. Why are you still sticking to Manchester? Why don't you go to one of our brilliant universities, and etc., etc.? The guy was 70-something and etc., very famous scientist and so on, but he was not even a member of National Academy of Sciences. And I told him honestly the story. Look, I came to Manchester, at that time, about 8 years ago. In 3 years I got built up my lab from scratch. 4 years after that I was elected as a member of National Academy of Sciences, and all those little facts I got from Manchester. And the guy looked at me, saying, you better stick in Manchester. Okay,
Okay, well, I'm sure you see and present are glad to hear your interesting response to why you stay in Manchester. So we have heard from the Nobel laureate himself. So my question to President Nancy, I guess you must be the envy of many of your peers from the universities globally that you have the honor to have 2 Nobel laureates on staff. But is it a challenge? At the same time, how do you balance this challenge and being privileged to have 2 Nobel laureates? Share with us your thoughts.
Actually, the only challenge is trying to fight off the people who want to use me as an agent to get Andre to speak at events. This one's an exception because it's our alumni in Singapore. But apart from that, actually, no, it's not a challenge.
Well, one of your minions
told you differently.
Gave a presentation about what a challenge is to deal with Nobel laureates. It's Alan Ferner. Yeah, I saw his presentation. They, especially myself, okay, who sometimes give interviews, okay, who sometimes ambushed by journalists speaking what I think. I'm not a cheerleader, okay? I'm not wearing pompons like Nancy usually does, okay? So I sometimes, say something, and then the guy's coming, okay, we have to protect our president. What do we do about this guy? He said, okay, this and that, okay? Yeah, one of those, it's about National Graphene Institute, for example. Okay, that was I was reprimanded, not really reprimanded, but the Queen made the Queen, okay, if you express her dissatisfaction quite clearly, okay, when I ask what I think about George Osborne, which is the second most important person in the Parliament, I said, okay, he loves science, which is true. Not probably because he understands this science, but because it gives him great photo opportunities, which is also true actually. And this was all over newspapers. Okay, this kind of political fallout. Okay, they're not very welcome by Vice President's office, obviously, but okay, they have to live with this one.
But actually, that's probably less of a challenge than some of my staff pose to me.
So, okay, well, it definitely is more of an honor rather than challenge.
Oh, yes.
Great. So, okay, my next few questions will be more relevant as an alumnus in Singapore.
Should we give the opportunity to people ask questions?
We'll do it after the two or three more questions,
okay,
because I think this is probably more pertinent as the president of the association. Sir Andre, this afternoon you mentioned, or just now you mentioned, you are 5% Singaporean. So you must have spent a lot of time in Singapore. Can you share with us why is this so? Because I'm sure our fellow Singapore alumni will be interested to know the reasons why you said you are 5% Singaporean.
First time I came to Singapore, if I remember correctly, 2008, and start helping a friend of mine to build up this Graphene research center at the NUS. And I like the country, actually. I like the climate, unlike little islanders from England who like when it's raining and when it's cold. I like when it's hot and humid because I was born on the Black Sea coast, which is Mediterranean climate. I like the climate. I like how well organized the society is, and I even read memoirs of Lee Kuan Yew, and actually gave the book to Nancy to read. She didn't read it yet, as far as I understand. So I try to understand how the system managed to work so well, and probably best than describing why I like the Singapore, I'll give you an evidence that I do like Singapore. So when I was in Qingdao, in China, I was speaking with Mayor of Qingdao, and after half an hour of discussion with the mayor, he appointed me an economic advisor to the province of Qingdao, and etc., etc.
Which worried me significantly.
Which I wouldn't really care about, but if I would be appointed a scientific advisor, but economic advisor, I took it as a kind of a very large compliment. And the essence why he was so impressed by my economic knowledge about that one, I told him the story, not the story, in between lines. I told him, because I was born in Russia, and etc., etc., the conversation walked into the discussion about Russia, and I told him, if Gorbachev would speak a little bit of Chinese rather than a little bit of English, he would go like Dame Nancy to Singapore to look for an advice from Lee Kuan Yew rather than from advice of Ronald Reagan. And if it would be so, maybe Russia would be not in such a deep economic shit this time, and would be also better off and doing as well as China. So that probably explains my full-hearted feeling to Singapore.
Well, as a Singaporean, I'm very glad to hear that. So we hope we are able to convince you from a 5% to 30% or 50% in future as Singaporeans. So, President Nancy, now this question is from the Alumni Association and as the Alumni President on behalf of the association. Your last alumni event here in Singapore is January 2013, here in Fullerton Hotel 2. And we know you travel to Singapore on university business quite regularly and a fair bit in Singapore. Why is it so important for you and other university colleagues to visit Singapore and meet our alumni, such as those here tonight? What's the significance of the Singapore in terms of university or yourself strategic angle?
So, Singaporeans have been coming to study in Manchester, many at UMIST and the Victoria University, for many decades. Actually, without wishing to criticise, this is one of our oldest alumni bases, as well as one of our youngest. We have nearly 4,500 alumni in Singapore.
Well, we have alumni, I'm sure tonight over here, we have alumni that spreads from the 60s to the most recent.
Yep, last year. So it's a very large alumni base, it's a very diverse alumni base, and it's a very successful group of alumni who have done very well. So partly I come to meet those people and to see how we can help each other for the benefit of Singapore and for the benefit of Manchester. I come to Singapore because there's a very strong research base here in the universities and in A-Star. We continue to recruit students from Singapore, and we have a lot of business links with Singapore. So it's strategically an extremely important country for the UK and for Manchester. And it's also very well placed for Asia generally. Yep. And it is a big help that you all speak such good English, I have to say.
Well, we have more than 4,000 alumni here in Singapore, and I'm sure a lot of them are all very proud with our Manchester history. So we're all very proud to be associated with the university, and from the association perspective, whatever we can help with the university to promote the branding, we have all of us here.
And if I could add, I do like Singaporean clothes.
Thank you. So a final question to our president. What key messages and advice do you want to convey to our alumni? And how the university can engage more closely with the Singapore alumni better via the association?
So first of all, we greatly value you. We greatly value your support and everything you're doing. We're very keen to identify new areas of collaboration where we might work with you, as I said, for mutual benefit in businesses, in international exchanges, are extremely important. We will have either myself or a senior member of staff here at least once a year. But the last thing I would say to you is, particularly if you haven't been to Manchester for a while, do come back. If it was some time ago, you won't recognise the place. The old buildings are still there, but there are so many amazing new buildings and investment coming into Manchester. So please come back. And as I know, flying out tonight, the flight's pretty easy.
No, I'm pretty sure I was back in October last year for the board meeting, and Manchester has totally changed from 15 or close to 20 years before I was there. So the whole city is all in construction because of new tram, new infrastructure. But alumni, make a trip, put in your calendar, make a trip to Manchester. Actually, the association is trying to do a back to memory lane. So we are keen to see whoever alumni that is keen to do a back to memory lane, get in touch with us. We are trying to put something together later this year. So thank you both of you for your interesting sharing and insight to those questions. Now we can take a few questions from the audience before we go to our networking and buffet reception. Anyone, please? Give the mic to So that gentleman over there.
Hi.
Will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Cole. I'm a current PhD student at University of Manchester, but on a two-year stint at A-Star.
So you're not an alumni yet?
Not yet.
You will be soon.
But I benefit greatly from donations from alumni, so I thought I'd come and give my thanks. So you mentioned about funding. So although, yes, you said that the UK has a lot to learn from Singapore in terms of funding, at IMCB at least, we're actually going through fairly severe budget cuts. So, along that line, my question is, in the UK, how do you think the upcoming referendum about in or out of the EU will affect funding for science in the UK?
So, I can answer, but Andre may wish to answer as well. I think how it will affect funding depends on the results. I personally believe that for Britain to exit the EU will be harmful for science, for so many different reasons, and actually not just funding. It's being part of a larger European community of science and withdrawing and not being engaged in Europe. And some people say to me, well, those countries that are not in the EU do okay, and some of them do. But I think it's rather different never being a member of the EU from being a member and deciding to leave, which I think might be treated rather less favourably. So I think an exit would be a bad thing.
Any more questions from the floor?
There's one here.
Hi, Vicky. I'm an MBA alumni from Manchester. My question's a little bit more personal. I wanted to ask about your behaviours as a child and if you always knew that you were going to be a scientist. Were you always tinkering with your parents' washing machine or car?
For Andre?
Yes, to Andre. And is there anything we should be looking at in our own children and encouraging or removing obstacles?
The answer is, do you hear me? The answer is rather trivial. We live in a society, okay? We influenced by society from very early age. It starts at a kindergarten when you have inclinations, when you are a bit better in math or in exact scientist, or we are better in art, performing and other exercises. All those skills are usually picked up by your teachers at an early age, and then parents pick up as well, so they encourage any child in the direction he is more inclined. So you naturally, if you have some inklings in one or another direction, the society and your parents as well try to encourage you develop those skills. So I apparently had good math skills, and good memory. So environment encouraged me to progress around those skills rather than being a cheerleader and wear pom-poms and a political.
So I'm going to answer your question as not a Nobel Prize winner, but also a scientist. I wrote an essay when I was 5, and we were asked at school, what do we want to be when we grow up? And I wrote, I want to be a famous scientist. However, by the time I was 17, I decided I did not want to do science, I wanted to do art. And it was only a year or two later that I came back to doing science. So you don't necessarily make those choices.
Gentlemen.
Hi, I'm Dennis Tan. I'm an electrical engineering alumni. I would like to ask Andre, what is your lead now, the research that you're carrying out? And also I'd like to actually tap your mind as a researcher, as an innovator. What do you think is important that we have in us?
Sorry. I think we know more or less everything fundamentally about graphene, and I'm a fundamental scientist. I'm not really looking into application, just, sometimes, circumstances force me to look what's possible with this material. We still continue, as I told you, we have discovered less than a decade ago, a whole class of 2005, a whole class of two-dimensional materials landed up on our table. So there is a lot of work to be done, and it's not a blip on a computer screen. You get something very remarkable but very local. At the moment there are 15,000 papers per year referring to graphene, and probably another 5,000 to other two-dimensional materials. So if the cost of each paper is roughly estimated around $100,000, so the human race invests several $1 billion into study of this new class of materials, and we'll look what's possible with these materials. There are so many questions to be answered, so I am looking for new directions. I don't like a crowd, okay? I always try to avoid a crowd. I try to find a green patch of grass in order to graze myself there. And when there is a whole tribe of elephants around, so I try to run away. So I ran away from graphenes and ran away from two-dimensional materials. Now, what I got my latest award was van der Waals heterostructures. It's making those materials. You disassemble crystals. Those who are not electrical engineers or material scientists, imagine a crystal. You take individual planes, pull them aside from different crystals and get those two-dimensional materials, and then try to reassemble something three-dimensional again using these Lego or Lego bits to create some pyramid or whatever structure you would like. So it's now called van der Waals heterostructures. I still enjoy this research, and I publish a lot of prestigious papers after the Nobel Prize, more than 10 science and nature papers, which supposed to be the highlight of everything. So it's very active at the moment, and I'm not going to retire to become a politician or a cheerleader.
So will we be expecting to see a second Nobel Prize for yourself?
He didn't expect the first one.
I'm not delusional.
Any questions? Okay, gentleman over there.
Hello, Andrew. Actually, my name is Jing. So actually, I'm a Manchester alumni graduating a PhD in materials in 2014. So actually, I want to ask you for personal career advice. Actually, I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher based in NTU. However, I have studied in China. I have studied in Manchester for 7 years, and I have been working in Singapore for last 1 month. So actually, I find now it's quite struggling for young scientists like me if we want to find a job position in the university, because it seems the university I have experienced so far, they have set up a high standard, especially for the impacting factor of the journal publications when they try to screen the candidates for interview. So that means if you have a lower whole impacting factor in your journal publication, so you get less chance to get this interview. So I just want to ask, so that makes a lot of young scientists to switch their field of research to some fancy research field like graphene research field. However, they give up their original research which they have been doing for last 7 or 10 years. So I just want to ask you, for the young scientists actually over the world, do you suggest them to try to boost their career in this way, or you think they should continue with their own original research, to doing more research, to get more experience and get promoted in their future career?
Yeah, it's a good question, and that's a difficult one. Okay, it depends on personality. What I certainly discourage is to do research in the same area from your scientific cradle to your scientific coffin. I called it the German style when you are successful as a PhD student because you were lucky to enter some particular area and then get good publications and carry on and retire doing the same research. And I know people where the area went up, then went down, and then went up again. It's cycle 25 years. I believe it's typical for science. So if you're twice on the trough and or otherwise you can be lucky or not lucky. So if you have an ability, I suggest to switch between different areas as much as possible. Graphene is fancy and hyped. That's completely right assessment of this area, but it wasn't hyped, say, 10 years ago. I remember referees writing that this is nothing interesting will come out from this Scotch tape and etc. Very little advance and so on. So, but the more you switch, the more you learn. The more you learn, the more arsenal you have at your disposal. It's you get different bits of information which you can combine later in your career. So it requires a lot of learning and a lot of work, but the more you switch, the better. At least I switched my research direction. I can't remember how many times, at least 10 times, and people say, are you still doing graphene? I have forgotten when I was doing graphene last time. Even within graphene area, I switched from chemistry to medical sciences to God knows what. So it's all learning curves. So don't be afraid of changes, or better not to do science at all. So yeah.
One last question from the floor. Ladies? Mike?
So thank you for inviting me. I'm a Manchester Business School alumni 2005. Last year we had our 10-year anniversary in Manchester itself, so it's great to see the city so vibrant. It was lovely to see my classmates. So maybe a comment to Andre. You said you are 5% Singaporean, so hopefully Laksa is one of the 5% of what you do in Singapore. Do you know what Laksa is?
Sorry, what?
So maybe that will inch up your percentage to 10 if you try that.
Yeah.
It's a local cuisine.
Yeah, it increases because I essentially 1 month every year in Singapore, usually 2 visits, either 1 month long, 1 or 2 visits, 1-2 weeks, and we have a very intensive collaboration with the NUS concerning this class of new two-dimensional materials, and it's actually not formalized in any way. We really just like each other and like how it's going on. Now we're doing something which is completely not graphene, involves a little bit graphene, which involves, desalination and all those water purification problems, which is very far from my original research. But I also welcome business people into this area because, judging from my physics PhD students, it will wait for another 20 years before we get anything from their business skills. So we need business people to interact with physicists.
So my question actually is, I'm part of a team that does innovation in this part of the world for my industry. Question for you is, you talk about invention a lot on things that I'm not familiar with. In the business side, we talk about innovation a lot these days, and innovation is on the lips of many business people, and it's very much encouraged by Singapore, and Singapore is seen as an innovation hub. Question is, how do you see the university work with business and governments to really create the ecosystem to invent and bring new products to the market for businesses?
President.
It's a very important question, actually. It's very difficult questions to answer quickly, I'm afraid. I'm fundamental researcher doing something as obscure, as, say, Higgs bosons. Everyone knows what they are, but no one knows why they need for. It's my normal time, but seeing the attitude of big companies towards innovation, taking on what's going on at the universities, I was so frustrated that I started looking how we can help to move this material forward to consumer products. And initially it started with encouraging my PhD students to open their own companies. Disclaimer: I never take any shares in any of those students' companies, and no remuneration, whatever. I'm happy that they can earn their livings. 4 or 5 my PhD students went to open those companies, and it was a complete disaster. Those companies still operational, and some of those requires arm twisting, and I told yesterday a story about my PhD student or postdoc whom I told, I fire you next month, your contract will finish, so you have a choice either to become unemployed or you open your own company, you know to do what, and then we'll help you whatever we can. And eventually this company was successful, taken over by another company called Company 2D Tech, and another student, even more remarkable story. This gives you a mentality of material science and physics PhD students who actually want to be civil servants. They don't want to be rich. They don't want to become rich. They want to just be safe and secure in the rest of their lives. They don't want to take any risk. There is a company, the very first company on graphene, called Graphene Industries. It has been run by PhD students and postdoc. One person, he expanded at some moment to become 2-person companies, and he found out it's too complicated to fill those forms and etc. and take care about his second employer. So he still, after 10 years, he's 1-person company. He's doing good business. He's doing £100,000 a year sales, practically no expenses, 80% profit, everyone can dream of, and etc., etc. But to characterize his business skills, I tell you, once I asked him, how is your order book? He says, too many orders. I said, what you are doing about those orders? He's saying, well, it's difficult. I have to decline sort of 60% of those orders. How you decide which orders to take? If an email is good, I'll take it. If it's not, I decline to take this order. This is how our PhD students, and actually I know quite a few in Singapore, this is the mentality, unfortunately, of many people. So commercialization is really difficult. And,
well, I think it's almost 8 o'clock, so we're going to end the session here. So there's food over behind, so you guys can go ahead to have the buffet reception and the networking. So thanks for attending tonight's session, the In Conversation with, and hopefully not in the near too far future we'll have our Nobel Prize and President back here again soon. Thank you very much.